everybody. Welcome to another episode of Punching Up with Sean Conroy. I am Sean Conroy. I'm going to be punching up some sitcom pilots today. Of course, a sitcom pilot is the first episode of a show. It's where we find out about the show and everything there is to know and whether we want to continue watching the show. Now, I have a few... The shows I'm going to get into today are a couple of shows that are currently airing. They are successful. So I have lots of caveats before I start talking about these shows to make it seem like I know what I'm talking about. I have only ever sold a couple of pilots. None of my pilots have ever gotten actually made. And so the people that we're going to be talking about today created stuff that was far more successful than what I have created, which is not a measure of intrinsic value. It doesn't mean they're better people than I am, although I'm sure they are better looking and thinner. They probably have more hair, which would not be hard to do. I have only come close to selling a television program once, and it was all set up. And then I had a college reunion, so it was great because I told everybody I had this TV show coming out, and then it all fell apart after I got back to LA, which was also great because I didn't see those people again for 5 more years, so nobody remembered that I had said that. Or at least they didn't mention it to me. So I want to talk for a moment about what I'm looking for in a pilot when I'm reading somebody's pilot, because really that's what I am talking about. I'm not talking about the way I perceive something on screen, even though the 2 pilots I'm going to be talking about today have both been made and you can watch both of them. What I'm really talking about is when you are at the level of trying to get people interested in your writing. So it's much more important what's on the page and what's coming through in what's written than it is, for example, what stars are in your show, what kind of publicity campaign you have behind you, whether or not you have the photos of the stars in your show on the sides of buses or on billboards down on the Sunset Strip. That stuff is all great, but most of us are starting at a lower level than that, and we're saying, I just want you to read this and tell me that you like it and that you want to work with me and you want to invest your time and money in working with me. That's what I'm looking for. So I don't care about big names. I don't care about publicity. I don't care about what network. I just care about what is on the page. Your pilot script is made for people to read and get an idea of what the pilot is ultimately going to be. One of the very cool things about the process of writing scripts for television and for movies as well is that when you have it there on the page and you give it to people, those people bring so much more than you ever thought was possible to what your work is, and it changes everything. And it's just a very cool, interesting feeling to go, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it that way, but that actor is doing this, or that set designer is doing this. And that's the joy of the work, but you have to get there before you can get to that stuff. So I just want to enjoy what I'm reading. Now, obviously, I'm working on pilots here that have been made, and I'm not reading the script, but I'm going to evaluate them from the position of what if this was a script that I was reading. And one of the things I always think about when I am reading a script is what's going to make me keep reading. In other words, I look at... I used to teach junior high school science. So, of course, I look at everything from the perspective of Newton's laws of motion. Newton's first law of motion is that objects in motion tend to remain in motion. Objects at rest tend to remain at rest. So when I start reading, unless a force acts on me, I'm going to keep reading. What are the forces that could act on me? Boredom, disinterest, a lack of certain ingredients to the pilot. Those are all going to make me go, I don't know if I want to keep reading this. Um, so here are the things that I am looking for when I am reading a pilot. I'm looking for a cold open that is fun and exciting and draws me in. Cold open, of course, is the very first scene of your pilot. It is obviously going to be shot as the first scene, but when you're reading, that's the thing that's really going to set the reader's mind of, oh, this person knows what they're doing, or uh-oh, I might have to buckle up a little bit. Well, you should always wear your seatbelt. I want some good, hard jokes in that cold open because this is a sitcom, ostensibly. And I want some comedy along with my situation. And I want to know that I can trust this person to make me laugh. So good, hard jokes are always a good thing. Um, I want to know from that cold open who is the star of the show? Who am I watching? Who am I paying attention to? Why should I be interested in this person? What makes this person more interesting than anybody else on the show? Um, I want to know from the pilot, what's the world we're going to be in? Why is this an interesting world? Why is it different from my day-to-day life? Or if it's the same as my day-to-day life, why would I want to spend time there? And that also leads me to the next thing I'm looking for, which is interesting supporting characters. Who else is there that I want to spend time with? And then the last thing I am looking for is a story, a good story. Does this person who's writing this pilot know how to tell a story that makes sense? It's not just a bunch of funny things happening. It is events that follow events that are the result of other events that lead to a satisfying ending. And that is, I think the story is the hardest part of all of this because a lot of people do think that it's just a bunch of funny things that happen. One of the things that I used to love when I worked on Mr. Pickles was if I went on message boards, there was always somebody who would say, it's so cool that they just give these guys drugs and let them write whatever they want. And that always cracked me up because I was like, if you knew how hard we worked to make these stories make sense, I'm not saying we succeeded all the time, but we did work hard at it. Okay. So just to again caveat this, I was saying the people who made these pilots are so much more successful and popular and better looking and thinner and hairier, not hairier, but more hairy than I am. The two pilots I'm looking at are The Paper, which was created by Greg Daniels and Michael Koman. And then we're also going to look at St. Denis, which was created by Justin Spitzer. And talk about guys who've had success. Greg Daniels created or co-created King of the Hill. He co-created the American version of The Office. He co-created Parks and Rec, Space Force, a show called Upload, which I have never seen, but I heard it's great. So that's quite a list of successful, good television programs. Michael Koman has written on a bunch of stuff. I knew him when he was a writer at Conan. He's worked on SNL. He's worked on How To with John Wilson, lots of other stuff. Nice guy. I don't know Greg. I don't know if he's a nice guy or not, so I can't speak to that, but I know that Coman is a nice guy. And then Justin Spitzer, who created a little show called Superstore and another show called American Auto, both of which were very successful. I believe that these guys all worked together, or at least Justin and Greg worked together on The Office. I could be wrong about that. I have, on a couple of occasions, I've been wrong about things, but I like to just throw stuff out there and hope that nobody fact checks me. Um, so I'm going to get into these pilots and I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the two. I would say, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, but I would say probably to get anything out of this, you should have watched these shows so you can see what I'm talking about. Really, what this would be a live show where I had a little clicker and I could start and stop the pilot and go, okay, see what happened there? That's what I liked. See what happened there? That's what I liked even more. See what happened there? That was even better than the two other things I liked. But unfortunately, that's not how, I don't know if you know about podcasts, that's not how they work. Um, okay, so let's start with, and like I said, I'm going to go back and forth, but let's start with the cold open for the paper. The paper, of course, is connected to the world of The Office. It is described as a spinoff of The Office, I suppose, because it is shot in the same style as The Office, and relates to a struggling business the way The Office did. Um, I guess, and oh, and there's other reasons too. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But anyway, we start in The Office with Vance. We find out from Vance that he's working at Vance Refrigeration, and he is married to Phyllis, who was a big character on The Office. He tells us that there's now, in the space where the paper company used to be, there's now a laser. I don't know what it's, if it's a, it's called One and Done. It's some kind of laser removal place. I don't know if they take lasers out or if it's a hair removal place or a tattoo. There's a lot of things you can do with lasers, but anyway, I'm excited because I'm like, okay, Vance seems like a good guy, a good character. I can't wait to see what happens with this guy. He's clearly the star of the show. Then we go into the One and Done laser office and we meet the person behind the counter who says that she has just moved to Scranton from Alaska because her sister disappeared. I do love I do love jokes like that, uh, because it's two completely unrelated statements that somehow are supposed to connect. I moved here because my sister disappeared from Alaska. It's like there's so much going on in that statement that is unexplained. That those kind of things are very fun. So I presume that this is going to be a show about the relationship between, Vance at Vance Refrigeration and the person at the laser removal place. Um, but it's not. It's not about that at all. It's not about any of that stuff. That is all fan service to people who love The Office, I guess, who are excited to see Vance, excited to know what's going on in the office park. Now that 20 years have gone by, the paper company has been bought out by a larger paper company called Enervate, and they have moved to Toledo, Ohio. So it was a head fake. I'm not supposed to pay that much attention to those first couple of characters. And if I am reading this script, I'm a little bit trepidatious at this point. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on here. So then we move to Toledo. Apparently the camera crew took a bus or a flight. I don't know how far it is. Probably not that far from Scranton to Toledo, a few hours drive, maybe a bus or a van. And they are in the Enervate paper building, and we meet a guy named Ken who starts showing us around. I'm like, okay, Ken is British, like the original cast of The Office. So he tells us about the paper company and different types of paper. There's a whole thing about janitorial paper and toilet paper, and he brings us to the I guess he puts us on the floor where the toilet paper people are. Uh, we also meet his boss, who is the great Alan Havey from Mad Men. I forget his character's name on Mad Men. But anyway, Alan Havey, one of my favorites all time. So Ken and Alan Havey are the next two characters we meet. So I'm like, okay, we're going to follow these guys as they negotiate through. No, another false start. Those guys are not as important as some other people we're about to meet. So we go in and we see the toilet paper people, and then in another part of the same floor are the people for the Toledo paper, the local paper, which has downsized and downsized and downsized. Um, and the first character who works at the paper we meet is Mare the compositor. So she is involved in taking stories off the wire and putting them on the front page of the paper. Not actual reporting, just moving stuff around. She seems a little disenchanted with her job, but now we know that there are people who actually work at the paper, and we are going to be following those people. So if I'm reading the script, I have already met one, two, three, four, five characters before I've gotten to somebody who maybe is the star of the show. We're not sure yet. So let's talk a little bit about St. Denis, the cold open to St. Denis. We start with a nurse named Alex who is working with a drug addict patient. She's releasing him into the world and saying he needs to get help for his drug addiction. Uh, then she tells him that if he is not going to get help with his drug addiction, she has a good hookup and she can get him some really good drugs. And it turns out she's kidding. She's lying to him to trick him into saying that he's going to go back to drugs so she can chide him again and say, "Don't do that. I want you to get the help you need." Which I think is a great way to introduce us to that character. Because I really did when I first the first time I watched the pilot of St. Denis, I bought into her being a person. For a second, I bought into her being a person who would say, I have a great hookup. Because I didn't know anything about the show. And I was like, oh, this is going to be like I don't know, like a Nurse Jackie Breaking Bad. She's involved with drugs thing. Of course, it's a network sitcom, so that would never happen. But what the hell do I know? And then when she flipped it and said, no, you're not supposed to agree to that. I thought that was just a great little character moment. And we know right away, we start on that character and we know that this character is important. And it turns out she is, in fact, the star of the show, which is a nice thing to know right away. When I'm reading the script, again, I'm trying to do two things at once here, which is talk about the thing I watched and talk about it from the point of view as a reader. We meet Joyce, who is the boss, who's sort of a choo-choo rah-rah kind of person, very, very excitable and wants everything to be great, and maybe is pretending a little bit. We meet Serena, who's another nurse who finds out there's a new nurse from Montana, and Serena immediately starts gyrating in a very sexual way, like she is going to have sex with this cowboy from Montana. So we're already three characters deep. I feel like they're very specifically differentiated from each other. And I know which one is the most important, which is, or actually, that's not totally true. The boss could be more important, except the boss is never going to be the most important character in these shows because we always want the character who brings the most conflict, and the boss doesn't have the most conflict. They have the the they have the ability to end any discussion. And you could look at The Office and say, well, Michael Scott is the boss, which you'd be right about, but he's always dealing with outside agitators as well. Um, so we know Alex, we know Joyce, we know Serena, and we immediately hear that Alex needs to leave by 4 because her kid has a recital, and they're doing Mamma Mia at the recital. Again, we're right into what the story of the episode is. Is she or is she not going to be able to leave by 4? And we kind of know going into it that she's not going to be able to leave by 4, but how are things going to go wrong, and how is she going to try to solve those problems? She just wants to leave. She wants to see her kid do this Mamma Mia, which apparently is a very popular musical. Um, so we're at a point where we've met basically the same number of cast members in both shows, but the cast members in St. Denis all feel important, whereas the cast members in the paper that we've met, only one of them really feels important so far. Now, you could argue that the two guys who show uh, show the crew into the paper floor are important because they do come back later, but they definitely don't feel like, oh, we're definitely going to get a lot more from these guys. So if I'm reading it, I'm like, I want to know that these characters are important right from the beginning, and I want to know who is the most important. Back into the paper, we meet Barry, who does the sports pages. We meet Esmeralda, who is the interim managing editor or something like that. And then as Esmeralda is explaining how she works on the news, we see out the window there is a building on fire across the street, which feels like it would be important to the local news. Um, and nobody notices. Nobody from the paper notices. You assume that the documentary crew notices, but they don't say anything. They don't get involved because they're never involved. They're just there to record. Uh, Esmeralda tells a story about that she put in the paper about how much Ben Affleck tipped his limo driver. Point being, they have these stories that are not particularly important. But at one point, she says, we get into the history of tipping, and she says, what was the first tip? Maybe it was a piece of cheese. Again, great joke. I love this kind of joke because it almost feels like, and maybe it feels like it could have been improvised. And it's very character based. Like this is what the character thinks might be a tip back in the day before there was such a thing as money. Maybe somebody would give somebody a piece of cheese for their ride in their limo. Um, anyway, I'm always appreciative of a good joke. Then we meet Nicole, who's very shy. We meet Dietrich, who's in ad sales. We meet the accountants. There's 3 of them, including Oscar from The Office. So again, we're meeting a lot of people, and we don't know that much about any of them. And the problem with not knowing a whole lot about any of them, as I'm reading the script, is 2 things. One, I don't know where I'm supposed to be looking. Who am I watching at this point? Am I watching, I'm going to try to remember their names, Esmeralda, Mare, Barry, uh, Nicole, Dietrich, Oscar, the other 2 accountants? Um, who among them am I watching? And also, uh, what about them should make me care about them. I'm meeting them at a very surface level, and I am not getting to know them at all in a way that would make me care about them. They feel like funny devices more than interesting characters right now. Every character deserves a big entrance, a big moment. Introduce your characters as if it is some kind of pageant, not a cocktail party. So, in other words, you want your character to come in and say, I am Miss Canada. I play the French horn. I know how to juggle. I have taken 7 CPR classes. I am a black belt in judo, and I bake the world's greatest banana bread. So now we know a lot about that character. I mean, that's not a whole great example because that's all just about stuff they can do. So maybe if in a pageant you would say, I am in a fraught relationship with a guy that maybe things might work out with, maybe they don't. Something like that to make us care more about them as well. But just giving that character a big moment, as opposed to a cocktail party where you go, hey, Sean, this is Nicole and Dietrich and Oscar and 2 accountants and Esmeralda. And like, I'm not great at cocktail parties except with the cocktail part. So I'm not going to remember any of these people's names or what they do or, any of that stuff because I met so many of them at once and it's overwhelming to me. And I feel like if I was reading the script, I would already be going, okay, who am I supposed to be focused on here? And the other thing I'll say is we're now going on 10 minutes into the episode, and I don't know really what the story is. It's almost like it's more of and this in a way makes sense, it's more of a documentary just saying, look at this place, look at these people. This is what their day-to-day life is. And there's lots of them here, and they're interesting innately because of the fact that media is failing in this country. Um, and I think that's not enough if I'm reading your script. I want to know what we're working towards. What's the story here? Um, we're about 10 minutes and 30 seconds into this, and we meet Ned, Ned Swanson. And we know that Ned is the star because he is played by an actual movie star. But if I was reading the script, I would not know that Donald Gleason was involved in this project. And I guess I would go, okay, this guy is 10 minutes in to a pilot. And this is another thing about the paper versus St. Denis. The paper is over 30 minutes long, the pilot. And so it feels over 30 minutes long, whereas St. Denis is a 22-minute pilot and really is expeditious with getting information out and letting us know what's happening moment to moment. But Ned bumps into Mare in the hallway, knocks her salad over, and then gets locked in his office on the floor upstairs where his office is. He's locked into the office. There's apparently been some people who have taken acid and come in and caused a ruckus, so they can't be sure that he belongs there, and he can't remember the name of the person that he has the appointment with. So now I'm like, okay, this is a little bit of a story beat. What's going to happen here? Related to him being locked in the office and them not wanting to let him out. And then they let him out. They let him out. That's the end of that beat is he gets out. So turns out not to be that big of a deal. Um, he takes Mare to buy more food because he knocked her food over. and we get a long scene between them of more backstory of why he ended up at the paper. And it's all interesting, and some of it's very funny. He has, I think she says something at the end like, that's a pretty good story that for something that involves that much nepotism or something like that. Like he's very focused on his father, and his father's a philanderer, and his father got him one job and got him another job and then got him this job. This is the job he's always wanted because he's always wanted to be editor of a newspaper. And he is going to be the editor in chief. And Mare is very surprised by this because Esmeralda has been in charge for a while now. She's the interim editor, but she's been in charge for a while. And then they have their meeting with Esmeralda where it comes out that Ned is going to be the editor, and Esmeralda sends an email to everybody in the office that says Ned was never Me Too'd, which again is a funny idea that all of a sudden by telling people that they're going to they're going to think there's something up, of course, when in fact there really is nothing up. And it all leads to the great line from Ned, which is, you don't have to not a thing that isn't. I'm a big fan of that kind of twisted verbiage joke. So that was fun. And so Ned gets to get up and make a speech, sort of a, I know, Captain, my Captain speech on top of somebody's desk about how he wants to make the paper into something and he's looking for help. So I think that is kind of the story of the episode is Ned works there and he wants to do something with the paper. It feels to me, if I'm reading it, not if I'm watching it. If I'm watching it, I'm like, holy shit, these guys got a show on the air. If I'm reading it as a sample script, I'm going, there's not really a lot of a story here. This is sort of an Avengers Assemble without what they're assembling for. I mean, I guess they're assembling to make the newspaper better, but it doesn't feel particularly high stakes. We're back at St. Denis. Alex needs to get out by 4. And of course, Joyce has gotten them a new mammography machine and doesn't understand the bandwidth the mammography machine will take up. And so as soon as they turn it on, it crashes all of the computers. And now there's a big problem. And of course, Alex has to stay and help sort out that problem. We then get a meeting scene, which was entertaining to me only because it was very reminiscent, even in the set design, of the meeting scenes they used to have in Superstore. I admittedly did not watch American Auto, but there were frequently group scenes in Superstore that took place in the back room of the store, and this scene takes place in the back room of the hospital, which I find entertaining. I want to check only because, like, you have to do that. You have to have that where everybody interacts with each other. But like, we've all watched The Pit at this point, and if we haven't, we should have. I've watched it a couple times, and they don't have those backroom scenes. Anytime they have a meeting in the emergency room, it's just kind of a very quick get together at a desk and a frantic discussion of what they're doing because it's an emergency room and they don't have time for that. So it's nice to see. I was gonna try to text, and of course I didn't do this. I have a cousin who works in the emergency room up in Montana, and I was just gonna text him and say, "Do you guys ever have meetings?" And just to see, maybe I'll do that before the next time I talk to you guys and see what he says. Wouldn't that be nice? But anyway, they have the group meeting. They have to rebuild the record system because the computer has crashed. Is Alex going to get out in time to go to her daughter's recital? Now, we've heard the recital thing a couple of times. We know she needs to get out. We know she's not getting out. Why is that such a problem? Well, they do a really nice thing here where they raise the stakes. And I always love to see a good stakes raising because we find out that uh, the lead girl in Mamma Mia has gotten sick, and now Alex's daughter is playing the lead in the recital. So it's an even bigger deal if she doesn't get there. Um, I'm always appreciative of that. Uh, then, the episode continues. We go to the parking lot. The woman who's been trying to get into the hospital all day is way sicker than anybody thought she was. The team all comes together and saves her life, which is a nice moment because it shows everybody being competent except the brand new nurse. Even Joyce, the goofy boss, turns out to have been a doctor at one point and sort of knows how to act in a situation like that where there's a I guess it was a code blue, right? They all work together. They figure it out. The surgeon who thinks he's Dr. House actually is right about there being something extra going on. She had a blood clot in her leg that led to a collapsed lung. I don't mean to laugh because those are very serious medical problems, but it all worked out and it's a sitcom. Alex is finally leaving to go home, and she is going to get in her car, and a guy comes up and says, "You saved my wife's life," and he hugs her. So, again, stakes wise, it gives us an emotional moment at the end of the episode where it's like, oh, this is why she does this. This is why she's got to be okay sometimes with missing her daughter's recital because, people need help. In the paper, we end with, we have the big speech on top of the desk. We end with Mayor taking what's his name? Donald Gleason's character, whose name I'm now forgetting, down into the basement to where the presses are running, or they're not running anymore, but where the presses used to run to make the paper. He presses a button and immediately his phone beeps because somebody has just texted him to donate their services as a reporter. So people are interested in his idea of making the paper into something again the way it used to be. So, you know, what do I get out of these? In the paper, I'm distracted by how many characters there are. I wish it was less characters and I wish they were treated more in depth. There's some great jokes early on, so I would probably keep reading. Although it took a long time to get to story, I was trying to figure out what the story was the whole time. And there is not a lot of story there. I don't mind there not being a lot of story, but I think if you're writing a spec script, which is what I'm talking about, a script that doesn't get made, you want to show that you can put a lot of story in. So I would say that's something to focus on. And is there a hook at the end of the episode that's going to keep us coming back? Yes, at the end of the paper, there is the hook of, are they going to be able to make this paper work in a world where papers no longer work? How are they going to end up? There's also the hook of, we see another shot out the window and there's another floor of the building on fire. I have not watched more of the paper, but I would love it if every episode we come back and another floor of the building across the way is on fire and it just never burns down. It's like a what do they call that? Eternal flame, like JFK's tomb. Um, and what about St. Denis? We get right into the character, we get right into the story. The characters are very differentiated from each other. There's a very specific story that raises the stakes all the way through. And what's going to keep us coming back? What's the hook? It's a medical show. So there's going to be all kinds of day-to-day events in the emergency room. And we've also gotten a sense for the interpersonal relationships among some of the characters. David Alan Grier's character sees himself in Alex, that he has put too much of his life into the hospital and has ended up in a place he doesn't want to be, divorced and living alone in a condo. He does not want her to go down that road, so that's an interesting relationship. Lots of stuff I would want to come back and see. The the new nurse from Montana thinks that Serena is the love of his life. She thinks he's an idiot. Classic sitcom, will they or won't they? I guess we'll see what happens. So anyway, that's my take on those two shows. And like I said, I'm looking at it from the point of view of, if I read these as scripts, how would I feel about them? And that's different from when they get made. As soon as something gets made, everything I'm saying goes out the window, and you get to do whatever you want, because now you have a budget, you have people who believe in it, you have stuff you can do. Whereas when you're writing a script to show people that you can write a script, there are things, and again, these are things that I'm looking for when I read scripts. I've read hundreds of scripts to hire people when I was running shows. I've also read hundreds of scripts from people who have taken my classes, so I have a sense of what I'm looking for to make the script interesting for me. And there's probably other people who would, in fact, I'm sure there are other people who would disagree with me about some of this stuff. So that's it. Check out St. Denis. Check out the paper. Let me know what you thought of both of them. You can email me at sean@seanconroy.com. You can also email me there to ask me anything you want about any of this stuff. Please give us ideas for what to talk about. I'm going to be doing this, and it can be about sitcoms, it can be about writing, it can be about comedy. So far, we've focused mostly on sitcom stuff, but I'm sure we're going to break out of that at some point. So feel free to ask anything. If you want to get some deeper dives into writing, the writing process, and my opinions of how stuff works and doesn't work, subscribe to my newsletter, which you can do at my website, seanconroy.com. Just want to say thank you to my producers, Dean Sharp and Augustine Islas. And that's it for this episode of Punching Up. We'll see you next time.